The opulent dining room of Kingsley's, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, had fallen completely silent. A powerful billionaire, Richard Montgomery, stood at his table, his face a mask of shock and something else, something no one there could quite read. Before him, a young black waitress, Diana Johnson, in a simple, crisp uniform, stood with a quiet and unshakable dignity. In her hand, which trembled only slightly, she held a single, heavy-stock business card he had just given her. The air was so thick with tension you could feel it. A woman at a nearby table leaned over to her companion, her voice a soft, reverent whisper. Did he just offer her a job? Or fire her in front of everyone? Diana looked from the heavy card back to the billionaire's conflicted eyes. Her expression was not one of gratitude, nor was it one of fear. It was one of calm, profound understanding. She knew, in that heart-stopping moment, that this single card represented a choice that would change everything. But to understand how she arrived at this life-altering moment, we must go back to just a few hours earlier, when the evening was just beginning. Diana Johnson's life was a masterclass in relentless hustle. Her day began long before her shift at Kingsley's, and it ended long after. The restaurant was her first stop, a world of sparkling crystal and whispered power, where she moved with an expert grace, anticipating the needs of Manhattan's elite before they even knew they had them. She was good at her job, professional, efficient, and nearly invisible, which was exactly how the management and clientele preferred it. But when her shift ended, her day was far from over. She would take a long, late-night bus ride, the glamour of the restaurant fading with every mile. Her second job was at a quiet, dusty bookstore, a peaceful haven where she could catch her breath stacking shelves. Her third job, however, was not a job at all. It was her heart. It was a small, worn-down community center in a forgotten part of the city. The peeling sign on the door read, "Freedom Steps." Inside, under flickering fluorescent lights, Diana would volunteer, patiently tutoring children. This center was her dream, a nonprofit she had co-founded to provide dance and movement therapy for children with disabilities. It was a place built on the belief that every child deserved the chance to lead, to move at their own pace. But her dream was dying. Taped to the front door, stark and cruel, was a bright orange eviction notice. The center was out of money and out of time. This financial desperation was the heavy secret she carried with her back to the gleaming floors of Kingsley's. It was into this world that Richard Montgomery and his son Lucas arrived. They were seated in Diana's section, and from the moment they sat down, she saw what others missed. The other staff saw only Richard Montgomery, the billionaire, a man whose name was whispered with a mixture of fear and awe. They saw his power, his expensive watch, his cold, dismissive attitude. But Diana saw a father drowning in a grief so deep it had frozen him solid. And she saw his 10-year-old son, Lucas, a quiet, lonely boy whose metal leg braces seemed as heavy as the sadness in his eyes. She watched Richard's curt, controlling interactions, correcting his son's posture, cutting his food for him, managing his every move. He wasn't being a father, he was being a warden. Then, the restaurant's live pianist began a soft, beautiful melody. And something happened. On a sudden, pure impulse, little Lucas pushed his chair back. He stood up on his unsteady legs, the metal of his braces scraping softly against the polished floor. He looked around, and his eyes landed on Diana. Without a word, he held out his small hand, a silent, brave invitation to dance. The moment was broken by the sharp voice of the manager, Mr. Thornton, who rushed to the table. "Sir, control your son," he said, his voice laced with disapproval. "This is inappropriate. Our employees are not here for entertainment." The entire restaurant seemed to freeze. The diners saw an awkward disruption. Richard saw a public humiliation. But Diana, and only Diana, saw something else entirely. She saw a child's courageous attempt to connect. She saw him trying, for one brief moment, to lead. Richard Montgomery's face tightened with embarrassment. "Lucas, sit down," he ordered, his voice low and firm. Lucas's small hand, which had been held out with so much hope, dropped to his side. His shoulders slumped and his eyes filled with a familiar shame. The entire room was a jury, and the verdict was clear. The boy had done something wrong. And in that moment, Diana Johnson faced a test. She was exhausted. Her dream was crumbling. The eviction notice a burning image in her mind. This job, this paycheck, was her only lifeline. Every rational thought told her to look away, to let her manager handle it, to retreat into the invisibility she was paid for. She could keep her job, a job she desperately, desperately needed. But as she looked at Lucas's crushed spirit, she asked herself a silent question. What was the price of that job? To turn her back on a child's dignity? To stand by and watch his brave spark be extinguished by a world that didn't understand it? The answer came to her in a wave of quiet certainty. She knew that openly defying her manager would mean she would be fired on the spot. So in a moment of quiet brilliance, she found another way. A way to preserve not her job, but her integrity. She took a deep breath, and with a steady hand, she reached behind her back and began to untie her apron. She walked calmly over to Mr. Thornton. "Mr. Thornton, I'm leaving," she said, her voice clear and steady enough for the nearby tables to hear. "My shift is over." The manager stared at her, speechless. Before he could respond, Diana turned her back on him and walked toward Lucas. A warm, genuine smile broke through her tired expression, a smile meant only for him. "I can't dance in an apron," she said softly, and she took his small, waiting hand in hers. It was an act of rebellion disguised as an act of service. She had, in effect, just quit her job. But she had done it on her own terms. The room watched, mesmerized, as she followed the boy onto the small, open space between the tables. She didn't guide him or pull him along. She let him lead. She adjusted her own graceful steps to his halting, painful ones. With each clumsy movement, something in Lucas's eyes changed. The shame was replaced by intense concentration. The fear gave way to a shy, fierce pride. For the first time since the accident that had damaged his legs, he wasn't being helped or corrected. He was leading. And after a few beautiful, awkward steps, she led him back to his seat. When Richard Montgomery finally found his voice and stopped her as she turned to leave, he handed her that single business card, bringing the evening to its fateful, uncertain climax. The next morning, Diana stood in the lobby of Montgomery Tower, a cathedral of glass and steel. She felt small and out of place in her best outfit, surrounded by people in clothes that cost more than her rent. Richard's assistant, a sharp woman named Miss Winters, looked her up and down with a dismissive air, clearly assuming Diana was there to beg for her job back after being fired. But when she was led into Richard's vast office, with its panoramic view of the city, Diana refused to be intimidated. Richard sat behind a desk the size of a car, a king on his throne. He tried to control the meeting with long, calculated silences, a tactic designed to make people nervous. But Diana waited patiently, her hands folded in her lap. Finally, he spoke. He revealed that he had spent the night doing his research. He opened a folder and laid it on the desk. Inside were documents about Freedom Steps. He knew about her background in child development. He knew her non-profit was about to be evicted. He knew everything. Then he made his move. He offered her a job as a therapeutic companion for Lucas, at a salary that would solve all her financial problems in an instant. It was a simple, powerful solution. He would buy away the problem. But Richard Montgomery had fundamentally misunderstood the woman sitting before him. This was the moment of the true reveal. Diana looked at the desperate father hiding behind the billionaire, and she shook her head. "No," she said softly. Richard looked genuinely shocked. It was a word he rarely heard. "I don't work for people who see only my color or my social class before they see my competence," she explained calmly. "And I definitely don't work for people who try to buy solutions to emotional problems." She stood up, her dignity a shield that all his money could not penetrate. "Your son doesn't need another expert telling him what to do. He needs a father who will see him for who he is." This was her moment. She had been offered a simple reward, a high-paying job, but she refused it. Instead, she reached into her worn purse and took out a simple, creased business card of her own. It was a card for Freedom Steps. She walked to his billion-dollar desk and placed it gently on the polished surface. Her request was not for a handout. It was for something much more valuable. "Classes are Tuesdays and Thursdays," she said. The first one is free. She was asking him to step out of his world of power and into his son's world of possibility. A week later, a gleaming Bentley pulled up outside the dilapidated community center. Richard and Lucas got out. Inside, Richard was humbled. He saw children in wheelchairs, on crutches, with all manner of disabilities, moving with a joy and freedom he had never seen in his own son. He saw Diana, not as a waitress, but as a leader, a scientist of the human spirit. It was there he learned the truth. The Freedom Steps program was a groundbreaking neurorehabilitation pilot, and his own foundation had rejected her funding proposals 3 times, without ever even reading them. The final reward was not simple. It was systemic. At a press conference held right there in the community center, a humbled Richard Montgomery didn't just write a check. He announced the creation of the Montgomery Johnson Initiative. He pledged to build a state-of-the-art National Center for Adaptive Movement, and in an act of ultimate trust, he gave Diana full, autonomous control over the entire program. The final scenes of our story show the fruits of that one act of dignity. The new center is bright and bustling, filled with the laughter of children discovering their own strength. Lucas, now needing only a light cane on his most difficult days, is a mentor to the younger kids, his shyness replaced by a quiet confidence. And Richard Montgomery is there, not as a distant donor, but as an active board member, his head bent over scientific papers, learning from the woman he once saw as just a waitress. One act of courage, one moment of choosing dignity over desperation, did not just earn a reward. It created a new paradigm for pediatric therapy, transforming the lives of thousands of children. And more importantly, it healed a broken family, teaching a father that true power isn't found in controlling every move, but in having the wisdom and courage to follow when your child shows you a better way.